Chromosomes. Little strands of nucleic acids and proteins are the fundamental genetic instructions that tell us who we are at birth. Most people are born with 46 chromosomes, but each year in the United States, about 6,000 people are born with an extra chromosome, making them a person with Down syndrome. If you've ever encountered someone with Down syndrome, you know that they are some of the kindest, most joyful people you will ever meet. They truly have something extra. My name is Lisa Nichols, and I have spent the last 24 years as both the CEO of Technology Partners and as the mother to Allie. Allie has something extra in every sense of the word. I have been blessed to be by her side as she impacts everyone she meets. Through these two important roles as CEO and mother to Allie, I have witnessed countless life lessons that have fundamentally changed the way I look at the world. While you may not have an extra chromosome, every leader has something extra that defines who you are. Join me as I explore the something extra in leaders from all walks of life and discover how that difference in each of them has made a difference in their companies, their families, their communities, and in themselves. I am delighted to have Jane Edison Stevenson on the show today. Jane is the Vice Chairman of Board and CEO Services at Korn Ferry International. If you like this episode today, please go to Apple Podcast or wherever you listen and leave us a 5-star rating. Well, Jane, I am so delighted to have you on the Something Extra podcast today. I know what a busy woman you are. I am so honored. I know that you flew back last night so you could be in your seat today for this podcast. And I just so appreciate you. I appreciate the model that you are for other women. And we've just got so much to talk about today, but thank you for making the time.
It's a privilege. So anyway, always fun to talk to you, Lisa.
We do have fun, don't we? Well, and I always like to kind of go back, Jane, and talk to people and let our listeners know how do you connect to people? It is amazing though when I read something yesterday about just showing up, right? And you and I are both in an organization called CEO Forum. And you and I have spent some time together there. And I've told you this as a side note, but I'm just going to say this to our listeners. When I first met Jane, immediately her warmth came through, her authenticity came through, her humility. She's a servant leader. She's a faith-filled woman. But I very quickly got to know her and thought, this woman is brilliant. And you probably don't describe yourself as that way, Jane, but you are. But, having that servant leader and that humility, but then the brilliance and the competence that comes along with it, it's really very rare. And so I cannot wait today to get into this discussion so that you can share a lot of your brilliance with our listeners. But tell me, how did you grow up? Now, I know that you went to school. I think you went to school in D.C., right? Or outside of D.C.
I went to college in D.C. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. My parents taught at a Christian boarding high school. And so I grew up there and then went to college in the D.C. area. And then from there, we moved to California. We're there for about a year and a half and then moved to Philadelphia. We're there for 11 years. Then my husband had gone to medical school on an Air Force scholarship. So we moved to San Antonio, Texas, where he did that payback, and then moved to Atlanta. And we've been here in Atlanta since 99.
Yeah. Wow. So, but you have lived a lot of places. See, I had no idea. When you were growing up, did you have siblings, Jane, or what were you in the birth order? Tell me a little bit about that.
So that's kind of a funny answer in that I'm the only biological child of my parents, but they were sort of resident parents in many ways. And so there were always a zillion kids around from the high school. And even today, very often I'll meet someone that knows one of them and they feel like part of our family. So I also have
I love that.
Kind of an adopted sister who used to be my sister-in-law, but who is very close to my parents. And so I call her my sister as well. So I kind of am an only child and a child of a zillion. So it's an odd mix.
I absolutely love that. I've got another friend that her dad was a foster kid, and now, she's got two biologicals, but she said, I've really got about 25 brothers. Her dad has just basically adopted all of these young men, but I love that. So what did you, and we're going to get into what you're doing today and kind of your career journey. What did you want to be when you were growing up? Did you aspire to something? Your parents were teachers, right? Is that what you were thinking that you wanted to do? What were you aspiring to do when you were growing up?
So growing up, I had, I think, a misperception that was common for women our age, which was that you could do anything unless you wanted to have a family. And if you wanted to have a family, then you needed to be a nurse or a teacher. And so that was just a subconscious message that I somehow learned or heard. And I decided that I did not want to be a nurse. And so I took elementary education and really had a desire from very young to have an orphanage or teach in the Appalachian Mountains. And when I married my husband 40 years ago, we cut a deal. He was definitely not interested in the teaching in the Appalachian Mountains. He's a physician. So I negotiated with him that at a certain level, it would be okay for me to have an orphanage. And that is still in my future. So not forgotten to this day, and we'll see how that unfolds. But I never in a million years thought, oh, I'm going to recruit the next CEO of Nike or Target or Newmont Mining or any of the others, that Coca-Cola that I've ended up being in leading.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about that. Well, there's probably something, though, in your DNA, that helping DNA or that wanting to help other people, realize their dreams. I mean, there's probably something in there, Jane, that's played itself out. An interesting fact about you, though, and we'll talk a little bit about this later when we get into your book, your Thomas Edison is in your lineage, I think.
Well, it's possible. It's a very kind of sad, but my great-grandfather got angry with the family and burned the records, not only at home, but in the courthouse. So there's a gap that we've never been able to fully crack. But the closest we anticipate is that we may be related to Thomas Edison's brother. But we've got this hole that several people have tried, and no one's been able to quantify that. But,
right.
But my name is Edison, and interestingly, he did look a lot like Thomas Edison.
Your lineage, yeah.
But we may never know for sure. So
right.
There aren't a lot of Edisons, that I will say.
Are there? Okay. We may never know this side of heaven. One day we'll know. One day we will know all things, right? Well, let's move into your career. So you like you said, I mean, you have been involved in recruiting the CEO for Nike, Coca-Cola. I mean, you have had just this illustrious career. I mean, really basically in the people business since you started. Because you were at Systems Personnel, then Howard Fisher Associates, you were the global managing partner, I think for maybe 9 years at Heidrick and Struggles. But for the last 12 years, you have been at Korn Ferry, which I know most people know Korn Ferry. You are the vice chair, global leader for CEO succession. You lead about 150 partners across the organization. I mean, what an amazing career that has been, right? And the people that you've met, Jane. What would you say has been the most surprising about the work that you've been doing for the last 12 years?
I think the most surprising is how leadership is something that is a constant in a very changing world. And the opportunity to make a dent in society through leadership is huge. So when you think about what leaders actually are able to do, and you think about the fact that 3/4 of our waking hours, in most cases, are spent on the job. And that a CEO touches the lives of, depending on the size and scale of the organization, thousands to, in the case of some clients, over 1 million employees. It's pretty amazing. And so what has been, I think, has become a mission is to really think about how better leaders can create a better world. And that is the practice that I lead. That is our purpose statement: better leaders, better world. And it's a passion for all of us to really create that ecosystem between leadership and the values and the ways that the world is led. And I think today, more than ever, business leaders are filling a void that used to be filled more through the political arena and through other avenues of leadership. So I think, if anything, that leadership need has heightened and become more of a day-to-day awareness on the part of many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, obviously you're leading the CEO succession, CEO assessments and placing CEOs, Jane, but, you don't have to be a CEO to be a leader either, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say leaders and titles are different. So you can look at famous people, and both may hold the same title, and yet what that impact is and what that leadership creates can be completely different. So who we are and what we bring to the party is so much more than aspiring to a particular label or title. It's really about the ability that we have to impact and influence in ways that elevate the people around us and that elevate the agenda on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good words. Well, and I want to ask you specifically about your leadership style, because obviously you are over many, many people. But, Jane, you regularly appear in lots of different global media, Business Week, Fortune, Wall Street. In fact, you were acknowledged by Business Week as one of the 100 most influential search consultants in the world, which is crazy. I mean, you have received multiple awards, but again, like I said in the beginning, you're incredibly humble. You really are a servant leader. So how do you think about your own leadership? How have you tended to lead your team? And I know we'll talk about this in your book. You talk about 4 different types of leaders, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I'll have you dig in more. But you personally, how have you led? How do you feel like, you're leading, you're the vice chair, you're leading this group. What is your leadership style? And how have you navigated your own career to get to that point where you're basically the leader of this group?
I think my leadership style is to try to be a force to help people to play full out. And if you were to ask me my personal mission statement, it would be for leaders and organizations to play full out. And most of my life has really been dedicated to that. And in my own leadership, I look at each person as an individual opportunity to shine. And so it's a question of how can we put that together in a way that really enables them to use the most of their talents and to put that into effect in a way that makes 2 and 2 equal, hopefully 6 or 7. So that's how I think about leadership. So it is also a way of thinking about people and each of us having roles. And in our organization, it's a client-focused business, and we each have different obligations and responsibilities and opportunities to serve. But we're all equal in that. And I just have a different role than someone else on the team, but we all really work for the client. So I think that's been pretty fundamental to my leadership from a fairly early age, is to think about how do we come together to serve, and I've been in service businesses my whole life, that ultimate client, and what can I bring and what can they bring, and how can that make a magical formula?
Yeah, that's so good. Well, let me ask you this, and I know, you've had great success, Jane. None of us get to where we are on our own, though. And I'm sure that you've
Oh
had
my
some
goodness.
good
Yeah.
mentors and good support system. Alan is one, right? Our families are definitely our support system. How have mentors and sponsors, coaches played out in your leadership journey? And then I would love for you, anecdotally, if you could, maybe even to talk about one of those. And, I can definitely do that for myself and just say, I remember when I was at McDonnell Douglas, my boss's boss kind of took me under his wing. I learned so much from him. I still quote him to this day, and I'm sure you've got some of those same stories. So how has mentorship and sponsorship and that played out in your career journey?
So it's been a learning journey just throughout, Lisa. And it's interesting. We often think in terms of mentors and sponsors as being above us. And I'd have to say there's been a few of those, but there have also been amazing opportunities to learn and grow from people on my team. And I feel if I had to say, what is one of the main reasons that I've had some of the unique opportunities that I've had, it's been having, in one case, an administrative assistant who just kind of took me on. and her name was Ina Luber, and she did some amazing things that changed what was possible in my life, including bringing in a nanny that I wasn't going to hire and helping to make sure that I was gluing things together in a way that was really an amazing opportunity. So I've been sandwiched, shall I say, with people who have been really great sponsors or role models that were senior to me throughout time. And then people who were on my team who believed in what was possible and what I could do and helped me to take on things that I probably wouldn't have without their help, without their support. So that's probably an odd answer, but
no, it's an excellent answer. It's an excellent answer. And I'm just sitting here thinking, really, because I think most people, like you said, I do think most people think of a mentor like somebody that's senior to you or has a little bit farther along. But I think that's an awesome perspective. You and I have talked about that and how our executive assistants, help us go so much further, right, than we would be able to do on our own. So I think my real point here is that, you cannot be an island. Number one, don't forget all the people that helped you get to where you are. And then secondly, I always say, make sure then you're doing that for somebody else.
Absolutely. And I think peers are also really important. And in a partnership type organization, it's a matrix. And there are so many peers that have spurred me on, inspired new thinking, new ways of going about things that have been fundamental to the growth and to the journey.
Yeah, so good. Well, we're gonna get into this a little bit, and then we'll have to take a quick break. But there's just so much good stuff here. I want to move into this study that you were the principal lead on at Korn Ferry. And it's called Women CEOs Speak Research. It is fascinating. It's such an informative study. We will put the link to this, Jane, in the show notes for our listeners. But I'm telling you, this is a fascinating study. There's so much good, rich material here and insights. But it was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And it's their 100 by 25. So if our listeners have not heard of that, tell our listeners a little bit, what is 100 by 25?
So Rockefeller funded a project called the 100 by 25 initiative, which was to have 100 women CEOs in the Fortune 500 by 2025. So we're getting closer and there's a lot of work to do, but that was the initiative. And I was asked, along with some colleagues, to meet with them, and they met with a number of groups. And they wanted to do a study that would help to move the needle. And so often, and what they had envisioned initially was to do a study on the headwinds for women. And having been one of the first women partners in my sphere, I've just heard about headwinds to death, and I've never seen it empower or turn something around in a positive way. And so we decided, let's do something that instead shines the light on the future path that could create more women CEOs. Because clearly, if understanding the headwinds was the issue, it would have been solved a long time ago. And they loved that concept and agreed to fund this initiative. And so we did the largest study of women CEOs in the Fortune 1000, because there weren't as many in the Fortune 500 to make it the richest study. And at the time we did the study, which was 5 years ago, there had been 94 women CEOs in the Fortune 1000 in history. And to have 57 of those women participate in the study is pretty astounding. And what we did—
a great sample size.
Right? It was a great sample size and such generosity on the part of the CEOs that were involved. And what they did was to participate in a behavioral leadership interview and to participate in a psychometric online assessment, which gave us a good line, a baseline of understanding. What was so powerful is that the women in the study, and not every one of them did the psychometric assessment, but every one of them did the deep dive behavioral leadership interview, and about 2/3 did the assessment. So it was a strong sample set. And out of 21 capability sets, and at Korn Ferry, we're really blessed to have the largest normed data set for leadership in the world, particularly at the CEO level. And these women ranked at the 99th or greater percentile on 16 of 21 capability sets. So that in itself was something that was really amazing to think about how accomplished and exceptional you would need to be to make it there as a woman. And the other thing that was equally amazing, and maybe even more so, is that 65% of the women had never considered themselves as a potential CEO. And not until someone senior to them, or in several cases, the board asked them to be CEO, did they ever consider it. So it just gives you a sense of this enormous capability set and an opening for women to perceive themselves in a way that creates aspiration by many more women than what at that time had been the case. So we did the study again with a current sample set of 20 CEOs that were appointed in the last 2 years in the Fortune 1000. And what we found was that their journey was more planful 5 years later and less arduous in the sense that they felt being a woman was particularly challenging. So it just goes to show that even in a short 5-year period, there has been some shift in positive ways. And what I would hope is that our daughters would all think that being a CEO is a normal thing for women to do. And when you think about not just women, but underrepresented talent of any kind, people of color, whatever the category might be, we know how far we've gotten with the leadership that we've had. What we don't know is what that incremental difference could be that might be represented by women and underrepresented leaders in the world. And so that to me is a real passion, is to tap into that untapped talent. And it takes two sides. It takes the individual leader to see it as a possibility, to aspire to it, to be willing to take on the trade-offs. And it takes organizations that create those opportunities in some of what I call critical pass-through roles. Those roles that are credibility builders that enable a board to look at their track record and their capability set as viable in the consideration when it's time to pick the next CEO. So that's some of what makes me really excited about this study and what it's opened up in terms of mindsets of women across the planet.
Yeah, it is so important. There's a few other things I do want to talk about. This is a 40-page study. So we're only going to scratch the surface here, Jane, but we do need to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Jane Essen Stevenson on the Something Extra podcast.
In business, the tendency is to seek out partners who are bigger, faster, stronger. When it comes to IT, you should be looking for smarter, faster, better. That's just what you'll find with the talented technologists at Technology Partners. Our experts develop custom solutions to tackle your most complex challenges, all to simplify your processes in the smartest, most efficient way possible. The time to be swift and nimble starts now. Go to technologypartners.net/solutions and see what's possible.
So welcome back, everyone, to the Something Extra podcast. So Jane, there's just so much more here that we can talk about. But, we've been talking about this amazing study that you were one of the principals on. And I know that you said in 2017, 6% of the Fortune 500 CEOs were women, but today it's now 9%. How do you feel like we are doing on that march to the 20% by 2025?
We have a lot of work to do. So on the one hand, being an optimist, moving from 6 to 9% is a 50% increase. So that is very good progress. On the other hand, we're halfway there and not quite, right? So we have to move exponentially over the next 3 years and really 2 years, since we're almost at 2023. So there's a lot of work to do, and that is very doable if the following happens. If women are moved into some of those critical pass-through roles that we were talking about right before the break, and are in more abundance in the pipelines of more companies, then that's very possible. That's very possible. So if you look at the generation one talent in most organizations, it is nowhere near 50% of what talent would be tapped. So that's where we've got a huge challenge, is to get more women into operating P&L roles. If I were to be overly simplistic and there were only one thing could be granted as a wish, that would be what would be granted as a wish, is get more women in P&L roles earlier on. If that happened, then I think the 100 women CEOs in the Fortune 500 goal could be realized without question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know in reading the study, that is one of the things, and cross-functional, right? I mean, I remember Kathy Mozzarella is a really good friend of mine, and Kathy's the CEO for Gray Bar. And I remember her saying, "Oh, I don't know much about HR. I don't know much." I think she started like in customer service, worked her way up through Gray Bar, and now is the CEO, but looking for those opportunities. Well, I don't know much about this. And this is kind of where that imposter syndrome comes in. Sometimes we think, oh, we're not enough. We can't do that, but don't be scared of that. Have courage, and, your confidence will grow, I think, as your competence grows, but look for those opportunities to broaden your experience, right?
Such an important insight, Lisa. The horizontal experience moves are so critical, and they were in evidence in almost every example. What's interesting is, as women, because we're balancing so much in life, often there's an efficiency mindset, and the efficiency mindset looks to a vertical trajectory. But if you're in a vertical trajectory and you're in a particular functional area, you will not experience those operating P&L roles. And it takes you out of thinking about some of those horizontal moves that, while they might not be at a higher level, are actually very strong builders of capability sets. I always think about Mary Barra in this particular situation. Mary, as CEO of General Motors, had a stint in communications and a stint in human resources on her journey. And if you remember what was happening at General Motors when she became CEO, there was a huge amount of visibility on some tragic outcomes, and she was testifying in front of the Senate, et cetera. And her comment to me was, understanding the power of people and how to harness that to change the organization fundamentally and quickly, and that communication capability to think about what are some of those ways that I can get a message across effectively were really pivotal. And yet when you think about what is the career track to be CEO at one of the largest automakers in the world, it would probably not have on it human resources and communication. So, we have to think holistically and not just in a, bird flying quickest distance from one point to the next, but in terms of broadening and creating an understanding of a lot of the aspects of running a business, which is not always intuitive.
Yeah. Excellent point. Excellent point. It's, yeah. I mean, the old adage, the quickest point from A to B is a straight line. Well, most of these women that are in these roles, it wasn't linear. I've got another friend, you probably know Bev Kay. You probably have heard that name, Jane, if you don't know her, but she says the way up is not always vertical. It can be horizontal too.
Definitely isn't. And wisdom doesn't happen vertically. It's interesting, as parents, we want so much for our children not to have difficult struggles. And yet the difficult struggles are what build character and what really enable an understanding of ourselves to be different than just a cakewalk. And so the depth in us, the wisdom in us, all of those kinds of things don't happen in a linear vertical way. They happen through life experience that is generally pretty horizontal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is excellent too. We could probably come back and do a whole podcast on that, Jane, and how those struggles really help with perseverance and grit and resilience and all those different character traits, right, that we need. But I want you to talk about this real quickly, and then we will, gosh, there's just so much here, but I want you to talk a little bit about this, and then I want to move into your book real briefly before we talk about something extra. How have you seen women's strengths play out? Having women in leadership roles, answer this question for me. How is that going to make an organization better, stronger, more profitable? We talk about diversity and how important it is, but specifically women's strengths, they lead differently. We know this. How have you seen that play out, Jane?
It's very interesting how COVID has, I think, put a spotlight on the unique capabilities that women bring in terms of empathy, in terms of followership, in terms of culture as a primary objective. And that's one of the things that came through strongly in the study, is that most of the women moved into their roles, not just for themselves, but to create a community and a culture that would be a gift to the people in the organizations. Coming through COVID and since COVID, where illness and wellness is such a primary issue in the world's consciousness, let's just say, has, I think, played very much to the strength that women bring to understand the whole person, to not only understand the strategy, but to be able to pull people into a connected endeavor to fill that strategy from a purpose-based orientation. Not only that, an understanding of the fact that every one of us as humans has unique struggles and a unique story. And it's when that story gets woven together as a tapestry or a mosaic that it really has power. And that is, I believe, part of why almost every study that is coming out shows the financial returns for a diverse leadership team, particularly gender diverse in the studies to date, it makes it compelling. It makes it really compelling to lead from a diverse lens and to pull those different stories into a singular purpose that the organization needs to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to wrap that up, I had read to you as a side note, like something that really resonated with me in this study is it says, people are the heart of everything. And really today, strategic thinking is no longer enough to be successful. You've got to have that emotional intelligence, the awareness, the empathic posture, right? The caring, the concern. And women, I think, do that really well, very relational. So I love that. Well, let's move into your book. So Jane, you wrote, I guess it was 2010, maybe, that you wrote the book Breaking Away. And here's the subtitle.
2011. And we wrote it it took 2 years, 2009 and 10 were the research and the writing. So.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about that timing, and I'm thinking you've got your husband, your amazing husband, you've got Jonathan, you've got Emily, you've got children. You were probably writing this in the middle of raising them too. So, which is just incredible. But here's the subtitle: How Great Leaders Create Innovation That Drives Sustainable Growth and Why Others Fail. You co-authored this with, what is his name? How do you say his name?
Cochran.
And he was a Coke executive, right?
He was head of innovation at Coke at the time.
Yeah, right. I love this. There's CIO Insights Best Business Books for 2011 said, this is a how-to guide on inspiring a culture of innovation in your workplace. I love it. You got it divided into 3 parts: the innovation equation, the leadership equation, the payoff, and activating growth. So tell me this, because you talk a lot about this. What's the difference? You talk about 3 different words: invention, innovation, discovery. How are all those related? Because I think sometimes people may use invention and innovation kind of synonymously, and they're really not. So Jane, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so one of the things we did in the research was we talked to 51 top executives, and it was only on the 50th interview, we asked every one of them, how would you define innovation? And it was only on the 50th interview that we got the first duplicate definition. So we talk a lot about innovation, but what do we really mean? And so when you think about innovation as really bringing things together to create a differentiating outcome that people are willing to pay for, that's really what is at the heart of it. So it might be even just a reshaping. And that's where we got into 4 types of innovation. That if you look through time, you'd find that almost any innovation you can come up with would fit into one of 4 types. And transformational innovation is the one that people think of the most, right? That's where it's an innovation that is likely an invention that changes society in some way. It's a the groundbreaking innovation. Those happen and they are fundamental. But behind that is then when you take that innovation and you move into different ways of utilizing that innovation that in itself could be groundbreaking and is born off of that, right? So different categories of innovation. And then you've got marketplace innovation, and marketplace innovation is where you take those categories and it's really the channel to delivery and the ways that you go about it that really creates the innovation. And then last but so not least, and one that should be in place 24/7 at any business, is operational innovation. And that is that, how do we do things better, cheaper, faster? That's a fundamental type of innovation. What's interesting is that each of those need different types of leaders. And the culture that helps to cultivate and unleash the power is different as well. What we found was that, interestingly, that transformational innovation is almost impossible to happen in corporate America. You have to create an incubated environment to give it time to prove itself. And in the book, I use the analogy of it's sort of like taking an egg into an airplane and dropping it to see if the bird will fly. And of course, the egg has to have the separate space and conditions to be able to get hatched, for the feathers to dry and whatnot before then it will fly. So just a little bit of insight there around innovation, which I think is so important as a mechanism. You remember I said about my purpose being for people and organizations to play full out, and for organizations to really play to the fullest of what's possible. they have to have a level of innovation, but they don't just need one type of innovation. They really need the right leaders cultivating all four types of innovation and in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I mean, there is so much here because in part 2, you describe the 4 types of leaders, the transformational leader, the category leader, the marketplace leader, and the operational leader, like we just talked about. And you've got to have the leaders that can do all of those things. So I also love in chapter 4, it's called Innovation That Performs, and it's the subtitle is The Sweet Spot. And you talk about the 3 W's and it's the concentric circles, right? And you say the more that you know about each one, the more you lower your risk and you increase your reward. So the 3 W's, but there's so much more. I would encourage our listeners, go out and get the book. It's filled with really good stuff. And like Jane said, if you are not innovative as an organization, you probably are not going to be around very long, right? Because the world continues to change and we need to continue to change and transform in all of these different levels of innovation, right, Jane? So incredibly important.
I actually think that the timing of innovation today is even heightened to when the book came out back in 2011. We're seeing, and we've done a lot of research on this at Korn Ferry, the need to perform and transform simultaneously post-COVID is heightened to a level that we've never seen before. And that agility to be able to manage those different agendas is incredibly high. So innovation and transformation is part of the fundamental today, whereas we used to think of innovation as future-focused, not so.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is it called? Building the plane while you're flying.
Exactly. Yeah.
You got to continue to perform, but then you've got to continue to transform, like you said, as you go along. It's so critical. But, that's why books like this, Jane, are really important. People need to study and read and understand for their own organization these different elements and just how important it is. So, I have to ask you though, we're nearing the end of our time here, although I would love to spend 5 more hours with you. We won't do that to our listeners today. But what do you believe, Jane, is the something extra that every leader needs? And boy, have you worked with a lot of them. So I know you've seen a lot. And I'll give you a couple. If you can't narrow it down to one, I'll give you a couple.
So I think the first is purpose. And leaders that are really up to something more than personal ambition or financial returns. And financial returns are critical, but a sense of that as an outcome as opposed to a reason is, I think that's something extra that leaders have to have, a sense of purpose. But coupled with that are 2 other things, and they are passion and courage. And when you are working with a leader that has passion around what they're doing, it engenders a sense of excitement and privilege to be part of it. And that, I think, is really showing up. As we've done research on what's needed in future CEOs, that's shown up really strongly. And then the sense of courage to take a stand, to go boldly into areas of calculated risk, but nonetheless moving things forward in ways that would not happen without your leadership. So I think those are the something extra kind of leaders, certainly a type of leadership I aspire to every day, and that I would encourage any leader at any level in the organization to cultivate and to become clear about.
That is just beautiful. I love that. I read something this morning, that purpose is really your rudder. Right, Jane? It's the rudder. I read something this morning. It said discipline without purpose is drudgery. Because you can be disciplined in different areas, but if you don't have that overall purpose, then you're saying why? Discipline for what, right? And so that purpose, I do believe, can really be your rudder, but that is just beautiful. Well, what are you excited about, Jane? What are you most excited about? Anything coming up? Or I know that the other thing that Jane does She doesn't just do placements and searches for CEOs and works with CEOs, but also board directors. So she's helping more women and people of diversity get onto corporate boards and things like that. So is there anything that's coming up that you're excited about that you want to tell our listeners about?
I'm excited about a new type of leadership. We call it enterprise leadership, and there's not a lot of supply, and there's a very high demand for enterprise leaders. So the opportunity to help leaders work across and beyond in their organizations, in other words, not just to function on what they are doing individually, but to really think holistically and to have that agility to perform and transform. We've done a lot of research on that and put a framework in place. So I am incredibly excited about how that can enable boards and leadership teams to harness the power of enterprise leadership in organizations to build better leaders and a better world, and to truly impact what's possible for business in a way that not only impacts the outcomes for an individual business, but impacts society and the places that we provide for our children and grandchildren to work in and to play full out in and to make a difference in the world.
Wonderful. Well, Jane, thank you again for being on the show today. I have absolutely loved, as always, anytime you and I get to spend some time together, it's always, I know I'm going to come away a better person. So thank you so much.
You are a privilege to engage with, and I hope there's something here that will touch different listeners. So great to be with you.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Something Extra with Lisa Nichols is a Technology Partners production. Copyright Technology Partners, Inc. 2019. For show notes or to reach Lisa, visit tpi.co/podcast. Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you listen.